just me singing, really.
That's so cool, right? Where the little X's are, these are notes that are pulled towards the major. So music is made up of three core elements: melody, harmony, and rhythm. And when it comes to playing lead guitar, these elements translate into scales, chords, and phrasing. So it's the interplay between those three things that really creates the magic. Now, a lot of lead guitar work is centered around the pentatonic scale, right? But that's really just the starting point, right? Great players, what they do is they manipulate the notes under their fingertips to really reflect the chords that they're playing over. And everyone uses the pentatonic scale, you know, in different places, but they all use the same kind of tricks. You know, for example, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan will play right here in pattern 1. You know, Hendrix played there a lot as well. Whereas Albert King would play right here in pattern 2. And then B.B. King would play. B.B. King plays there in the little B.B. box in pattern 3. You know, and then maybe Jimmy Page would. He'd be all over the place. But they're all doing the same thing. They're all using that pentatonic scale as a starting place. And then from there, they can kind of manipulate it to really create these amazing phrases and outline the chords. So like, for instance, when Eric Clapton is asked about how he solos, he says it's just, you know, he's just singing, right? Like, check this out. This is amazing.
Through your mind when you're about to start a solo?
I go through all kinds of, I mean, and you've got a brief span of like 10 seconds before, you know, you've stopped singing and you think, right, I've got to play something now, and you go through 100 different changes. By the time you've gone through those changes, it's time. And you just start singing. For me, I just start singing. If that's the groove, and it will be. That's just me singing, really.
You know, he says he's just singing there. He also mentions in other places that he uses these stock phrases all the time. So, like, check this out here.
When you're improvising, do you use stock phrases as the raw material? And if so, can you share some?
Yeah, there are phrases
so cool.
that I always play that are stock phrases that I work from, you know, which are just like... all these runs, you know, are put together from old phrases that I first started on, like...
But also, when you watch Eric Clapton play, 90% of what he's playing, he's just kind of like in the pentatonic scale, right? You know? So it's all rooted right there. So you can make things really complicated by trying to learn all these scales and modes and arpeggios, and all that stuff is really good, you know. But the truth is, most players are really kind of heavily relying on that pentatonic scale because it just sounds so good. But when you combine it with these different phrases, these kind of stock phrases like Eric's saying there, which are kind of like, these phrases are like, they're kind of these archetypal licks, or these licks that maybe they transfer from song to song to song. It might have started with Robert Johnson, then went to Eric Clapton, and then went to Stevie Ray Vaughan, and it just... every time you hear it, it's got this kind of history, and it kind of like has this echoic effect. But basically, when you combine the scales and these kind of patterns that we know with these stock phrases, and then you combine that with this framework where you're putting all this over different chords, because whenever you're playing over a different chord, the sound is going to change in relation to that chord, right? So it's this overlaying of these three things where the magic really happens. So today, I'm going to show you how you can take that basic pentatonic scale and you can manipulate it in very subtle ways to reflect the underlying chords. And this is what all the great players do, right? I'm going to call this pentatonic chord overlays, right? Where you're basically bringing together the scales and the chords, and then I'm also going to show you a bunch of stock phrases, right, that you can use for each one of these things. And, you know, so much music is based around the blues, right? You know, rock and roll, blues and jazz. It's based around, a lot of it is based around this, like a 1-4-5 progression, like you can see on the screen here, like a blues in C. You've got these kind of rotating chords. So if you look at the relationship between the scales and these three chords, that's a really great place to start. So basically think of it like you're adding another dimension to what you already know, right? you've got this, you already know your pentatonic scale, you already know these chords, and you're going to combine them together, and you already know some of these licks, and you're going to kind of like, you're going to start to kind of like bring all those things together. Okay, so let's break it down. So let's start by looking at the 1 chord. So if you look on the screen there, we're going to start off with just the regular pentatonic scale. Just like that. And then if you look in the second diagram, we're going to overlay on top of that an A7 chord. So the notes there, you've got the root, the 5th, and then the flat 7's right there. And then you got the major 3rd, 5th, and root on top. So there's all the notes. So you're going to basically, so you're going to be thinking about kind of overlaying that chord shape over the top of your scale so that you can start to kind of pull the notes together. And you can see basically a lot of the notes there are common to both, with the exception basically of just this one note here, which is the major 3rd. So the pentatonic scale, the minor pentatonic, has a minor 3rd, and then an A7 chord has a major 3rd. So when you're playing an A7 chord, the 1 chord, if you play a minor 3rd over the top of that, it sounds it's got a lot of tension in it. It's very angular sounding. Whereas if you play a major 3rd, it's right in there in the chord. So it's very sweet sounding, and that's a lot of what you're trying to do when you're playing. Is you're trying to kind of create tension and resolve, right? So when you land on a chord tone, it sounds really sweet and awesome and inside, and when you land on some of these more, you know, like that, it sounds cool, but it's you don't want to kind of hang there. It's like you want to move through that. So basically, just think of that pentatonic scale, and then you can see the little where the little X's are. These are notes that pull towards the major, and that's what you want to be doing. There's a couple of ways to do that. Like, so a simple stock phrase is just to go down the scale and then hammer on. So that becomes like a phrase right there. It has an awesome sound. And then on the top of the scale, when you get to this minor 3rd here, you can slide up or hammer on. But a great way to do it is just to push up towards that major 3rd. So but let me show you kind of the stock phrase that Eric Clapton's talking about. So basically what he does is he plays this kind of thing here. Or so that's the idea, where he's basically starting with a bend and then he goes up through the scale, up through this pentatonic scale. So you start with the bend and then you bar and back down. So it's just up and down the scale. And then he does this little kind of round the major 3rd there. So it's that kind of thing. Okay, so let's take a look at the 4 chord. So a great example of this would be, like, check out this. This is really cool. This is Jeff Healey, who's an amazing guitar player. And check out how when he goes to the 4 chord here, this kind of 12/8 slow blues, he kind of plays some really tasty notes. I'll show you how to do this. That's so cool, right? So that lick. So that lick right there, let me show you what's going on. So we're still keeping the same basic scale right here. He's playing in C, so let's go back to A. So A pentatonic scale, but with the chord we're playing over now is a D7, which is the 4 chord. And if you superimpose that chord over the top of that scale, a lot of the notes are the same. There's one different one this time, and it's different. Now, one of the things you'll notice, there's no major third here. And if you hit that major third, that Eric Clapton note over the 4 chord, it sounds kind of funky. It's like, you know, so it clashes, right? So when you're playing over the 4 chord, a great little trick is don't hit that major note. Stay all blues. Stay in your typical blues. You know, that sounds great. But the cool note you can add is this one right here on the scale. That note right there. And that note is the major third of the 4 chord. Or you can also think of it as the major 6th. So if you're in the key of A, if you're on 1 chord, it's like the 6th of the A. So it's like, which is a really pretty note. But over the 4 chord, it's the major third, right? So it's a really sweet sounding thing. And basically, that's what Jeff Healey's doing there. He's kind of, when he's playing over the 4 chord there. And then he does this bend into the minor third there. So he goes. So that's basically a 4 chord lick there. There's your stock lick. And you don't need to. And then he kind of does that falling down the steps. Where you kind of fall back down the scale, which is cool. It's like very dynamic. But you don't have to play it in a 12/8. You can play it in a, you know, and then you don't need to do that bend there. You can just go. So there's your kind of idea there is or, you know, Hendrix sometimes will add that note in of the 4 chord. And then another thing you can do is just miss out this note here. Just take that note out of the scale and then you get these cool Chuck Berry sound, which is really cool. Okay, so there's the superimposing that chord, and another way you can think about it too is like you've got D7 there, but you've also got D7 here, or D9.
All right, so for the next one, we're going to go to the 5 chord, and I'm going to throw a curveball at you. So to demonstrate, check this out here. This is really cool. He's awesome. All right, so there, right? What's going on? Take everything we've talked about and just move it down 3 frets, right? You know, say if we're playing in the key of C there, like BB. So we've got our pentatonic scale, you know, with the flexible third. So what we're going to do is we're going to move all that down 3 frets. So it's going to be, and then when you do that, it turns it to major pentatonic. And it sounds so cool when you play major pentatonic over the 5 chord. You can also do it over the 1 chord too. And that sounds cool too. And B.B. King does that a lot. But it sounds really cool when you just, for that 5 chord kind of turnaround, you throw these major pentatonic licks. So move it down from C, go down 3 frets, down the 5th fret. And there's your major pentatonic. So what that does is this little box here, the Albert box, that becomes a major pentatonic scale. And basically that's what B.B. King uses a lot. But he'll often do it up here on the B string, because you can get a bit more leverage on the B string. So that's where the famous BB box is. Because you can get, on the B string, you can kind of dig in and get that, you know, amazing B.B. King vibrato. But the notes there are basically major pentatonic, but he effortlessly pulls and pushes back between the major and the minor pentatonic, and that's the really cool sort of triangulation where you're moving between these minor and major modalities effortlessly, like B.B. King, and it sounds so good. Let's take a look at the diagram here. So if you look on the screen there, we've got, okay, let's go back to A, right? We were in C there. Let's go back to A. So in the key of A blues, or in an A blues, the 5 chord would be an E, or an E7 actually, right? So you got an E, if you're playing A7, D7, and then you can play an E like this, right? It's actually an E7, or an E9, you know, whatever. E7 is actually the 5 chord of the key of A. So that's why it sounds so cool to play a major pentatonic, A major, because E7 is actually the key of A major. So when you're playing an A blues, you're basically playing minor pentatonic for the 1 chord and the 4 chord. But then when you get to the 5 chord, E7, it becomes... It just naturally fits the major there. All the notes are right there. So if you look on the chart there, basically it outlines an A major pentatonic scale, which is right there. But the useful part of it that most blues players use, they don't particularly use the lower section. They'll use this section here, these 5 notes. Okay, so also this note here, that's kind of a cool note to get in there because it's like a leading, it's like the leading tone where it's part of the E chord. And if you're going to get in there, that in there, it's got a cool sound, so you can add that in there. But essentially, these 5 notes, and that's what B.B. King plays, but he'll play them. He'll play them up there. But when you're using the major pentatonic scale, the magic of it is even though you're using these major notes, you actually pull towards the minor. So the way that you do that would be just to kind of like bend the notes, but not quite get all the way up to the major. Those kind of things. So you're... So there's all kinds of kind of fun you can have there, finding the notes in between the gaps like that. Let me show you another example here. This is Eric Clapton, and let me play the clip first, and then I'll show you some cool things about it. This is so cool, the way he's using the major and minor interplay, right? Okay, so that lick right there, that's all major pentatonic. This is a rock song in D. And the idea with this kind of song is that basically the tonal center of this song is a D chord, right? And that's kind of what you call a Mixolydian style progression. And what that means is that song's actually theoretically in the key of G, but the tonal center is a D chord, right? So that is a perfect place to use a D Mixolydian scale. When you use Mixolydian scales, or when you use kind of modes, things can get a little bit... Things can get a little weird, right? So you don't want to do that. No, just kidding. It's fun, but the perfect kind of rock sound over these kind of progressions is using a major pentatonic scale and then weaving it together with a minor pentatonic scale. Just like, so what he's doing there is he goes... that kind of thing. So basically starting a major, and then he's going minor, and then back to major. So that's an example. So if you bring that down into the key of A, you know, when you're going to your 5 chord, when you're playing a blues, you can just put those major licks in there. You know, B.B. King style licks, and then you can just switch back into the minor. If you look at all that together, what you end up with is this. When you're playing a blues, over the 1 chord, you're going to use your minor pentatonic scale, but you're going to target that major third. And then when you're playing over the 4 chord, you're going to use the minor pentatonic only, no major third. Don't bend that note. But you are going to add in this note, the natural 6th. Okay, and then when you get to the 5 chord, you're just going to jump into the major. You can even do it down here. Just move everything down 3 frets. And you can even do, the major pentatonic works great over the 1 chord as well. But it's a particularly kind of just a cool thing to throw in over the 5 chord, because it gives you that, the whole thing with the turnaround at the end of the blues, the last couple bars, is just adding that spiciness in there, and playing the major pentatonic B.B. King style licks is a great way to do that. All right, so, you know, there's 3 different things. You've got your chords, your scales, and then you've got these different kind of stock phrases. And each one of those things is simple, but when you bring them together, it creates this magic of 3 different elements. Because when you have, it's one of the rules of life, is like when you have 2 different things, things can be very predictable, you know, moving backwards and forth, two different things. It's like that book, The 3 Body Problem, right? When you introduce that 3rd gravitating body, it becomes infinite. The amount of creativity and the amount of potential that you have is completely infinite and unpredictable. So when you kind of like, when you think of your guitar playing and you bring in these elements of like, here's the chord, here's the scale, and these are simple things, but you bring them together and they're kind of like gravitating around each other. And then you bring in these stock licks and these kind of phrases that you've learned from your favorite players, and you mix those 3 things together, all of a sudden the creativity is endless. And, you know, you can have a lot of fun with it. So I hope this was helpful. And don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. Let me know what your thoughts are. There's loads of other stuff we could talk about. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know your ideas. And I appreciate you watching. And don't forget, turn it up.